Hello, students. In this chapter of Bhakti Sufi traditions, we've been seeing how the whole rigidity of the Veds and the Purans was gradually being transformed by independent people who also wanted to pursue the spiritual path but without any intermediary or interlocutors like Brahmins or the Pujaris or all those people who acted as middlemen between gods and humans. And the people who spearheaded all this were people from the scheduled castes and the Shudras and the women who traditionally had been kept away from the knowledge of the Veds and the Purans, and being in having a lot of prejudice, basically, that the women should not be doing this, and women were not eligible for the Vedic knowledge, and neither were the Shudras. So naturally, these people actually took an independent way, which was bhakti, whereby the direct devotion to God suddenly was made possible, and they could directly connect to God in whichever way they felt like. And Tantra happened to be a very important and a very powerful instrument which rose during that point in time in many parts of India. And it did not just touch the Hindu or the Sanatan Dharma, but also greatly influenced Buddhism as well. Okay, so today we look into the and it was in this that context that we saw the Alvars and the Nayanas in South India, whereby the Alvars were the followers of Lord Vishnu and the Nayanas were the followers of Lord Shiva. And we also saw that there was no conflict between the two, just the fact that yes, they had their own if I may use the word, affiliations or or loyalties for that matter. So today we look into attitudes towards caste. Some historians suggest that Alvars and the Nayanas initiated a movement of protest against the caste system and the dominance of the Brahmins, or at least attempted to reform the system. To some extent, this is corroborated by the fact that the Bhakts hailed from diverse social backgrounds, ranging from Brahmins to artisans and cultivators, and even from castes considered untouchable. The importance of the tradition of the Alvars and the Nayanas was sometimes indicated by the claims that their compositions were as important as the Vedas. For instance, one of the major anthologies of compositions by the Alvars, the Nalayira Divya Prabandham, was frequently described as the Tamil Veda, thus claiming that the text was as significant as the four Vedas in Sanskrit that were cherished by the Brahmins. Students, if you remember in one of the videos, I had told you that these the individual pursuits of spiritualism and the gods, these individual efforts, which which did not conform to any book. you know uh, there was nothing like a book on tantra, or there was nothing. They just, these people were just mavericks. They were non-conformists, that they just felt like, yes, I can also attain spiritualism, I can also see God, I can also experience God and his magic and his great devotion. And then they, one fine day, they would give up everything and start their own individual effort and pursue towards it. But what happened was, after 4, 5, 6 years, these people themselves would they would become spiritually very, very powerful and very, very uplifted. And what used to happen was, they used to attract great number of these people. Might have been from Shudra, they might be Shudra, or even women for that matter, but they then started attracting huge amount of following, because people could immediately understand, the common people, they could connect with whatever these individual pursuits had resulted in, or had given to the society. The people could immediately connect to that, because it was not about the learning of the Vedas or the Purans or the difficult texts which were written in Sanskrit invariably at that point in time. It was just something which came from the heart and the soul of the person who had been in that path for 5 years or 6 years or 10 years. And when people used to listen to their poems and their devotional songs, and they felt that yes, this gentleman or the woman could be very much not be a Brahmin, could be from some other caste, which could be even a low caste. But then what he is saying is marvelous. It is fantastic. It touches your soul. It brings tears to your eyes. And then what else do you need? So that is how it was. Women devotees. Perhaps one of the most striking features of these traditions was the presence of women. For instance, the compositions of Andal, a woman alvar, was widely sung and continues to be sung to date, and Andal saw herself as the beloved of Vishnu. Her verses expressed her love for the deity, and just like Mirabai in North India. Okay, um, Another woman, Karikal Amayyar, a devotee of Lord Shiva, adopted the path of extreme asceticism in order to attain her goal. Her compositions were preserved within the Nayana tradition. These women renounced their social obligations but did not join an alternative order or become nuns. Their very existence and their compositions posed a challenge to patriarchal norms. Patriarchal norms. It is about the fact that a lot of Brahmins and the men within the society, they felt that yes, what was happening was not right, because how could women of all things go into their individual pursuits and towards a devotion, or even dream of having a direct connection with the Supreme Father or the Almighty in whichever form they were, whether they were Lord Vishnu or Lord Shiva, whatever it was. Basically, the idea was, and what really alarmed the the people within, some of the people within the society and the decision makers within the society, in a segment which was a very powerful segment, was that how could women defy the wishes of the men? That's what it was all about. That how could they chart their own independence course for their lives? How could they actually decide to take an independent course? How could they afford to mind their own business, uh, without asking them? Relations with the state. We saw in chapter 2 that there were several important chiefdoms in the Tamil region in the early first millenniums. From the second half of the first millennium, there is evidence for states, including those of the Pallavas and the Pandyas, 6th to 9th centuries after Christ. That is, while Buddhism and Jainism had been prevalent in the region for several centuries, drawing support from merchant and artisan communities, these religious traditions received occasional royal patronage. Interestingly, one of the major themes in Tamil Bhakti hymns is the poet's opposition to Buddhism and Jainism. Okay, Buddhism and Jainism. This is particularly marked in the composition of the Nayanas. Historians have attempted to explain this hostility by suggesting that it was due to the competition between members of other religious traditions for royal patronage. What is evident is that the powerful Chola rulers, 9th to 13th centuries, supported Brahminical and Bhakti traditions, making land grants and constructing temples for Vishnu and Shiva. In fact, some of the most magnificent Shiva temples, including those at Chidambaram, Thanjavur, and Gangaikonda Cholapuram, were constructed under the patronage of Chola rulers. This was also the period when some of the most spectacular representations of Shiva in bronze sculpture was produced. Clearly, the visions of the Nayanas inspired artists. Both Nayanas and Alvars were revered by the Vellala peasants. Not surprisingly, rulers tried to win their support as well. The Chola kings, for instance, often attempted to claim divine support and proclaim their own power and status by building splendid temples that were adorned with stone and metal sculpture to recreate the vision of these popular saints who sang in the language of the people. Students, I have different kind of a slight different kind of a take here when they talk about the differences which the followers of the Alvar and the Nayanas tradition had with with Buddhism and Jainism. But first, you have to understand one thing very important, is that it was not a widespread hostility. Hostility is a very strong word used here. Hostility, you can have differences, but hostility would mean, sometimes you probably pick up arms, probably fight against each other, you stone each other, you burn the property, you vandalize the property, the religious texts, insult their uh, gurus and their gods through your works and the scriptures. But none of that kind happened. Nothing of that sort ever happened. So hostility would be a very strong word to use here, and in my opinion, a misrepresentation as well. You can say that there is a difference of opinion, and you have to understand, students, that even today, you are class 10, 12 students. Please try and understand. Even today, the purists within Hinduism, they still do not kind of see Buddhism and Jainism with a great amount of affection. Okay, they definitely not hostile. Okay, they would attend all their religious ceremonies, have great respect for Gautam Buddha and Vardhamana Mahavira, and would never say a word to insult them. It's not that they don't dare to, but they would never say a word to insult them. The reason for that is certain amount of differences, because Buddhism, you have to understand, Vardhaman Mahavira as well as Gautam Buddha, both were born as Hindus, right? Both were born as Kshatriyas, not as Shudras, right? Both of them came from royal family, but in the end, as they progressed and evolved in this spiritual path, they started kind of defying the Vedas. They said there was, the gods of Hindus, and they said that there was no God, that Vedas were rubbish. They would not believe, and they would not kind of validate, or would not kind of support most of the things that our Hindu scriptures had always said. They were always that there was no God. There are just certain universal rules as per which the whole universe functions. Of course, there is some higher power, but then that higher power is not as sentimental, or as affectionate, or as beautiful as Lord Krishna, or as righteous as Sri Ram, and probably would be having a trident like Mahadev, Bhagwan Shiv, and probably river Ganges coming out of his lock of hair. Now all that was considered to be very, very far-fetched by the teachers like Gautam Buddha and Mahavira, and definitely they kept themselves away from these kinds of ideas, and, if I may say, sentimentalities. And that was something which, and they never kind of acknowledged the greatness of Bhagavad Gita or the other great Hindu scriptures. And that was something which kind of sometimes used to, I wouldn't say pollute the environment, but it would kind of bring some kind of, lead to some kind of tensions within, definitely, among the followers, and especially the great teachers, because if you do not have, the basic students, you have to understand that if one section says there is no God, there are some universal values and certain universal principles, and the other section says, of course, there is God, there is Lord Shiva, there is Goddess Kali. And then if you look at them, their ideologies would be different, their philosophy would be different, what they define as spiritual pursuit would be different, the path that should be taken to achieve those spiritual goals would be different for both of the sections, because both of them, have an entirely different approach. It's like, a vegetarian, if he wants to have this vitamins and the vital ingredients, minerals, he would go for something else, and non-vegetarian would entirely something else. Thank you.